Welcome back, and thank you very much for joining us in this very important debate. I think that we are all in a very good mood, and we are warmed up, and we will try to make our best to keep this momentum. We will try to make sure that we can offer a future to our planet. My name is Hervé Bramy. I am the moderator of the Environment Working Group in the European Left. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the various speakers of our panel. And if I forget to mention some highlights of your career, please let me know. It is my pleasure to introduce Zakia Khattabi, who is the Belgian Minister in charge of climate. Zakia Khattabi is part of the Progressive Green movement. Mr. Minister, I'm sure that you will be able to specify precisely what you do. We have the pleasure to welcome Diego Pary Rodríguez, who is the former Bolivian Minister for Foreign Affairs. You are now the Bolivian ambassador to the UN. We also have with us Rossella Muroni, independent member of parliament, member of the Environment Committee in Italy, in the Italian parliament. You come from the civil society. We also have the pleasure of welcoming Urszula Zielińska. Urszula, you are the Vice President of the Environment Committee in the Polish Parliament, also a member of the Greens. And Andreu Escrivà, you are a writer and a scientist, and you come from Spain. You are Spanish, right? Okay. I also would like to thank our interpreters because thank you very much for that. It's not always easy to keep up with the pace at which our keynote speakers do work. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your kind words. I know that their work is really pivotal to our sessions. So, a few words to share with you that the Glasgow Pact tried, of course, to stick to this 1.5-degree objective. At the end of the COP26, of course, measures were announced, the official ones, but also the ones at the margin of the COP. Scientists made calculations, and they told us that we are now at a 2.7 degrees increase by 2100. So, of course, nations now are asked to react. In Sharm el-Sheikh in 2022, they will have to present new and much more ambitious national contributions if we want to achieve this objective of the 1.5 degrees, which would already be quite a lot. So, of course, I know that you will take the floor to tell us if you are disappointed. If you are disappointed, or if, on the other hand, you see some hope for the future. During the conference and also in the parallel sessions, announcements were made, promises were made also. I have in mind deforestation, for instance. I also have in mind methane reduction, in the atmosphere, of
On voit à
course,
la fin que l'exploitation
or
pétrolière est
oil
permise par
and
plus
gas
d'une vingtaine
mining
de pays.
by a limited number of
Cependant,
countries.
soulignons
This being
que
said,
pour la première fois, un
it
texte
is important to
international
say that for the first time,
mentionne
an
officiellement
international text officially
la
refers
réduction de
to
l'utilisation des
the
énergies fossiles.
reduced use of fossil fuels.
A été remarqué
And I
à
think that
juste
this
titre,
has
c'est
been
la première
considered
fois
as
que
an event in
c'est
itself, because
mentionné
it is
et
the first
précisé.
time that this issue is really officially stated and, I was going to say addressed, but not so much addressed, simply mentioned.
Soumis à la dernière
The
minute
amendment that
par rapport
was
de la Chine a
put
affaibli
forward at the very last
cette
minute
partie
by
du texte.
China has weakened this
Alors que le
chapter
président
in
de
the
la COP,
text.
Alan Sharman,
Elliot Sharman, the
très
president
sincèrement
of the
désolé,
COP, declared that he was extremely disappointed,
a
and
consacré la
the
formule
official vote enshrined this wording, progressive reduction, instead of progressive disappearance. So, of course, this is a
Cela
huge
reste
gap.
donc à parcourir
So we know that there is still a long way to
l'échelle de
go,
la planète
collectively
dans le but
speaking,
de voir
at
disparaître
international level,
progressivement
if
le
we
charbon,
want to see this
tout comme la situation
gradual disappearance of coal,
jugée inefficace
as
aux
well
combustibles
as
fossiles.
the other fossil fuels.
Nous sommes donc encore loin
So I
d'en
think that
réduire
we are still
définitivement
very
immédiat
far
de
from
45%
reducing by
d'ici
45%
2030, comme
the
le
global
préconise la COP.
emissions by 2035, as
On peut
it is
considérer que l'Union
advised
européenne
and recommended
n'a pas assez
by the
exprimé sa
IPCC. We
solidarité
also
avec les
believe
pays
that the
émergents en
EU did
développement
not show enough solidarity
afin de les
with the
accompagner dans
developing
les
states
actions
to
en
provide
matière
help
d'atténuation
so that they can
de leurs
also
dégâts
move
climatiques et de
forward
réchauffement
with
climatique.
the mitigation of
L'inverse au
their
sud de la planète,
processes.
sur les
We
peuples
know that
souffrent le plus
in
des effets
the global
catastrophiques climatiques.
south, we see
Là,
so many
les effets
populations
sociaux
suffering
sont
of
sensibles.
climate change, and this is where the impact
Or,
is the
ces pays
biggest.
sont très peu
We also
responsables
know that
de
actually
la
those
situation
southern
des
countries
pays
are
riches
not
de l'Europe
responsible for climate change.
qui,
If we compare
commencent à
the activities
subir
in the
aussi
northern
très
hemisphere, and we know
malheureusement
that in the
ces
north as well, our
conséquences.
countries are also suffering the
L'Atlantique avec
consequences
la
of climate
Chine
change,
en
as we
témoigne,
saw this summer. So
c'est-à-dire les
the
nations
time has
solidaires
come, I believe, that nations
pour
together
limiter
and
les
people
dommages
together should really act collectively
Cependant,
to
ce n'est pas ce
limit
qui
this
devrait
dramatic
être
impact.
attendu. Au
This
contraire,
being said, and I
nous
know that you
devons
will share your
œuvrer
views on this,
collectivement.
we can also
Ce sont les
say
pays
that
du Nord et les
historically
régions
speaking, it is the
industrialisées
wealthy, the rich, the
qui
developed
portent les
countries
responsabilités de la
that
situation
take their responsibilities, or that should take their
tandis
responsibilities
que
for the
les
current
pays du sud de
situation.
l'hémisphère
Whereas in the
subissent les
south,
conséquences
those are the
sans
countries
avoir
suffering the
comparativement
consequences.
œuvré.
And actually, they are not the
Cela
ones
constitue
that
une
triggered
contradiction.
this climate change.
Les
So
pays du Nord
this leads me to say
doivent
that
contribuer
the
plus
Northern
fortement
Hemisphere
à
countries
résolution de
should
cette
make a
question.
bigger contribution to finding a
Pour que le
solution to
Green
this
Deal
challenge.
devienne une
If we
réalité
want the
politique
Green
avec des
Deal to become a
conséquences
credible
responsables,
reality, and if we
selon
want
nous,
the
la
Glasgow
Commission
decisions
européenne
to
doit
be
immédiatement
successful,
adapter ses
the European
règles
Commission needs
en
to
matière
adapt its
d'investissement
rules
durable
in the
au
field of
sens
sustainable
d'une économie
investment
verte.
to the benefit of a green
Je ne suis
economy.
pas persuadé, en tout cas moi je ne suis pas persuadé,
We are not convinced,
que
and I have to say that,
l'industrie
I am not
soit
convinced
de nature
that
et de
the
capacité de
market
répondre
is
efficacement et vraiment
really able
aux
to
besoins
provide an
climatiques
accurate and
pragmatiques
a
à
good
long
answer
terme.
to
Le
climate
marché
change,
satisfait
because
les
as
industries
we all
et
know,
produits.
the market is there
Les
to
règles
make
qui
profits.
régiront les marchés internationaux de carbone
The rules
convenus à
that will
Glasgow
be
sont faibles.
implemented on the carbon markets,
Qu'en
the
est-il
rules
du
agreed
marché
in Glasgow,
carbone
are very weak.
européen
What about the European carbon
alors que dans la
markets?
carte verte,
We know that in the Green
la
Deal,
Commission envisage d'en créer de
the
nouveaux
European
répondant à
Commission
leurs
would like to
préoccupations et
create new
attentes.
markets in the fields
Ce
of
qui, par le
transport
passé,
and building.
était une logique
So
de marché
What can we say about that? What can we say about those carbon markets? Of course, it is important to avoid the double counting of the private companies in their countries of origin and in the countries where they do operate. This will not be enough to limit and reduce the greenhouse gases emissions. So we would like now together, we would like to address 4 or 5 themes. First of all, we will give the floor to our speakers because we would like to hear from them. What do they think about the COP26? The challenges related to the just transition, and this has been addressed already. So what about, or what are the social conditions needed to help citizens who already pay a high energy price? What about those employees who are really at the heart of this environmental transition? How do we take them into account? So what are your proposals? Then a third issue, what about the future? What about the energy mix? You probably know that quite a number of countries contemplate some new initiatives. Of course, the idea is to drastically reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases derived from coal and oil. But in this new energy mix, of course, we have to speak of renewable energies, and quite a number of countries, France being one of them, would like to use the nuclear energy. Of course, with more stringent safety rules monitored by independent agencies, or they do contemplate using gas with carbon capture systems. Well, I do not know whether this is really feasible for gas, but of course, I know that you will share your views with us on this. Finally, the 100 billion question. We know that this question dates back to Copenhagen in 2009. It was confirmed in Paris in 2015. And I think that now we have reached 80 billion. And no debate has taken place. I mean, this issue has been postponed to a later stage. So no consideration whatsoever for the countries in the south. So this was to set the scene, and I would like really to ask you what will be the future fights of the progressive camp on those challenges? What about the next EU or international legislations? What about the next international and EU fights? What are we going to do? What about our left activists? What should be the areas of focus? And also, what is the place we can give to our citizens? So this was, as I was telling you, to set the scene. Let me just find my program. So we have to follow the rule of the game. So that is to say, a speaking time of, let's say, 5 to a maximum of 7 minutes, because we would like to have an interactive debate. We really would like to hear from you too. So let's try to stick to 5 or 7 minutes each, if possible. And of course, we will then give you the floor. So I first would like to give the floor to Zakia Khattabi. You are the Belgian Minister in charge of climate, and I'm sure that you will specify your role very quickly. I am the Federal Minister in charge of climate, environment, sustainable development, and Green Deal. And before that, for 5 years, I was the president of the French-speaking Green Party in Belgium. So, very quickly, This balance, I think that, of course, we have to do with it. Of course, we know since the end of the COP26, now everyone is assessing the COP, but I say that we have to make up with it. I mean, what can we do with it? What are the lessons learned? Of course, we all have mixed feelings about that, but this shouldn't be used as an excuse not to move forward at the national level. So yes, we know that the results are disappointing. The Glasgow Pact is disappointing on finances, adaptation, collaboration between the North and the South. And if we want to fill the gap of some climate plans presented for 2030, I know that there are so many proposals related to the carbon neutrality. So we have to see how those commitments are going to be materialized. But what we do not say is that the current assessment might be negative today, but it finds its root in the Paris Agreement. And the original sin, so to say, is the Paris Agreement, and namely the voluntary mechanism enshrined in this Paris Agreement. There is no constraint for the states to fulfill their commitments. So, of course, we have all welcomed the Paris Agreement that came after Kyoto, and of course, we needed a little to be happy. So now, of course, we are assessing Glasgow versus what we had in Paris. So I wanted maybe to put things back in prospect here. So the expectations, of course, were different, and I simply wanted to set this scene. This being said, I think that it's important to keep on working. Of course, let's not overestimate the capacity of those bodies. At the level of the COP26, of course, we talked about climate, but at the heart of the discussion, we have our economic model, the growth ideology. And this was not the place to discuss this. Energy questions are not addressed there. Saudi Arabia, for a long time, highlighted that we were talking about climate and nothing else. But of course, we know, and you said this in your introduction, we know that it is about the human activities and the current growth economic model that is really responsible for the current situation. So we cannot ask the COP26 to bring solutions to problems that date back to so long ago. So this is what I was willing to say also. I believe that the left forces should work on this. Because, of course, climate is actually the consequence of this economic model. So this is a first way to analyze the situation. And sometimes we overestimate the capacity to move forward on those dossiers. So, of course, we have to find solutions at the national, at EU level. And if we are not successful at national level, we will always be disappointed by the COP's results. Now, this being said, I don't think that we can find solutions without the COP. So that's the reason why I advocate for those meetings to take place. And those COP meetings are the only venue where developing countries, small islands, civil society representatives still have a voice. They are not always listened to, but I think that this is a very important forum. If you take the WTO, for instance, everything there is so opaque. We do not know what's going on there. So, of course, I know that the results are disappointing, but we still need to continue and have those COP meetings to give simply the floor to this wide range of stakeholders. And of course, we need to go much beyond the COP text. Deforestation, fossil fuels. Of course, I know that we are disappointed, but for the first time, fossil fuels do appear in the text. We should also bear in mind the institutional reality of those COP meetings. We were not able to agree on a voting procedure. So this is about consensus. So this is quite important, especially if we think of those who are always slowing down those processes. So we have to take all those elements into account. A major challenge now, and that's also the reason why there is a bias in the discussions. As I told you, this is about the economic model, the growth model. How would it be possible to combine the obligation to reduce emissions with the obligation for emerging countries to develop? I mean, this is an issue that is not addressed by the COP, and it has a kind of paralyzing effect. The terms of the agreement in the COP are terms related to industrialized countries. Of course, we can pinpoint India and China, and you mentioned those countries. We know that with their coal mines, the Indians are emitting less gases per inhabitant per capita than here, than in Europe. This is also a reality. So what can we do to further reduce the greenhouse gases emissions? As an environmentalist, I was faced with the reality of the southern countries. And we have, of course, to take our own responsibilities. Of course, we do not want to be the countries that are slowing down those evolutions. So thinking of the future and the climate change, we need to broaden this debate. Of course, you have the SDGs, climate change. I think that this is a cross-cutting issue that should be addressed by a wide range of areas. Biodiversity is one of them, and I will end on this. Biodiversity is of the essence. I remember that my colleagues in my ministerial cabinet, we agreed to say that we need to work on several ways at the same time. We know that the electrification of the car park is not taking into account the raw materials and the planet limits. So I think that we need a global cross-cutting approach, taking into account everyone's realities. And so it is about really taking our responsibilities and showing solidarity at the national level, but also at the international one. Thank you.
Thank you, Zakia. It's never easy to be the first speaker in such a panel, so thank you. What I want to ask the other members of the panel is not to repeat, obviously, things that Zakia has already stated, but more complement her in an attempt to give our audience a wider perspective on the issue. You did, and this was interesting, mention the fact that when you look at climate, we have challenges, and a lot of scientists are working to try and ensure that we come up with consistent and realistic solutions. I think this is essential. The day we don't have a planet anymore to protect, well, obviously, I don't know what will become of us. I'd like now to give the floor to Diego Pary Rodríguez, who is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs in Bolivia. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And I want to, of course, thank you, Mr. Moderator, for your work. And I'm happy to be able to welcome the Belgian Minister in charge of the environment and the other members of the panel. I think this is an extremely interesting topic. We've been fighting climate change for about 10 years, I think, systematically. And I think it's high time we did some sort of balance exercise to see what we have achieved and what still remains to be done. In the southern countries, we believe that climate obviously is an essential topic, as an essential challenge. And Bolivia, with the rest of Latin American countries, is of course committed to fighting climate change. The problem is not fighting climate change. The problem is how to do that while we are facing a lot of destabilization, politically speaking. A lot of our countries are facing destabilizing, I would say, forces. How can we defend our climate? How can we defend our territories when the very functioning of our countries is questioned by some forces that want us to fail? Bolivia suffered a coup in 2019, and we thought, okay, people are unhappy, and people are going to react to the elections, and some people said there were, I mean, the elections were not fair elections. 7 research institutions have shown that there was actually nothing wrong with the elections, and none of the forces that were in charge at the time, on the left wing, of course, were in charge of or contributed to faking the elections. And the party that was accused of organizing electoral fraud then won the elections a year later after that, which proves the point that people were not, I mean, people understood what had happened. And I think it's important for us to say that we actually won the second election a year later after that coup, with more than double the number of votes that we usually have. So the coup was organized by many actors. International bodies were involved. Some internal forces were involved from Bolivia itself. There were also neighboring countries that tried to influence the country. The army and the police, of course, were involved in organizing this coup. And they asked our president to basically leave. And I think it's obvious when that happens that you're facing a real coup when suddenly someone else decides that he will be the president and has the support of the army and the police forces. In our case, I think we were also facing a series of sectors in the country that were trying to obtain and to get power and to be in charge. And they then tried to be recognized as the real leaders of the country and the fair rulers of the country, when in fact they were in charge of a coup and they killed hundreds, thousands of people. So I think in that sort of environment, political environment, of course, we need, in order to deal with the environment, we need to first deal with the sovereignty of the people. This is the starting point of any effective environmental action. We can't move on any major challenge such as climate change if we do not first have the guarantee that the will of the people will be respected. Then we have to deal with the wider forces out there. Capitalism, one, which I think is the main force that is destroying our Mother Earth. And we need, from our perspective of developing countries, but also from the perspective of more developed countries, we need to, well, say it loudly. Capitalism is destroying the planet. And then we need, of course, to act collectively, yes, to deal with climate change, but also to face our own personal responsibilities. Everybody has a responsibility. And historically speaking, developed countries have a responsibility. How can developed countries demand from developing countries that we do the same, act in the same way as you are trying to do? We are not responsible for pollution or for the destruction of the environment. You can't expect us to do what you are doing. How can you also ask us to stop using our resources. We are living because we have those resources. It's the only way we can survive. We have to sell the resources of our countries, and you can't expect from the point of view of developing countries is that we should stop doing that, which doesn't make any sense to us. We need more responsibility and more ability in developed countries who need to face their own responsibility. And then we need to act on two other aspects, which is technology and funding. We are not countries that have the ability to deal with the problem just like you in developed countries can do. You have to face your responsibility because we cannot always do everything you expect us to do. We can do a lot, and we're willing to do as much as we can and to contribute to the global effort, but only if developed countries take up their fair share of the burden. The COP26 has, I think, helped us. Yes, there's progress there, but there's progress only, or real progress only, if governments really meet their commitments. I mean, the Paris Agreement was signed 6 years ago, and still today it's just ink on paper. And not much has happened, or very little has happened, to turn it into reality. I think the Paris Agreement has not contributed to anything yet. We're facing the COVID crisis now across the world, and I think before the COVID crisis, it was already clear that the Sustainable Development Goals were not going to be met by the set deadline. We're now, of course, well, even later and running after time, because with COVID, obviously everything is now much more difficult. So we need to start moving to meet all those challenges that we face, and I will finish with this. I think this is also the issue with multilateralism. I'm in favor of multilateralism. I'm representing Bolivia within the United Nations. But the problem is that when you negotiate an agreement and when you debate about resolutions, we don't debate on the basis of who or what should be done to benefit the people, or what could be beneficial for mankind. We discuss and we negotiate, and the point is, how can we do as little as we can? That means, how can we act without affecting too negatively our countries? That's the sort of perspective that needs to change. If you want to achieve something, you have to be a bit more ambitious than that.
C'est compliqué, les masques.
Oh, it's not easy. Eh? Masks, microphones, I have to keep track of time. Okay, thank you very much, Diego. And I think your experience is extremely useful to us, of course, because you've been, after all, a minister in a big country and an important country. I think you've now got the experience of multilateralism and the UN, and I think that contributes a lot to the relevance and the interest of this discussion. I want to give the floor to Rossella Muroni, who is an independent member of the Italian Parliament, member of the Environment Committee. You have the floor.
Climate challenge is the most advanced front in the construction of a new Europe. It can give us hope and confidence for our common future. Leaving behind the age of fossil fuels means building a new, more innovative and efficient economy that is no longer a slave to oil and its wars. It means adding new values to Europe and giving an extra chance to be a privileged space for human hope. Today, this hope depends on the effective responses to current ecological crisis. Concrete hope for future generation, urgent action, radical solution, and an invitation to build together. The results of the recent Glasgow Climate Summit will be good if we had the time to waste. But the scientists have told us again, there is no more time. We have only 10 years to reverse the course of climate change. From then on, there will be no turning back. The Green Deal is the only option. There is no other way to reach the goal of climate neutrality by 2050, and before that, a major cut in CO2 emission by 2030. Three cornerstones: prosperity, people, planet, the basic principle of sustainable development. The European Union can't only show that it is united in words, but it must share the national policy aimed at reducing CO2 emission and at fighting the climate crisis by all means. We need a real partnership between our governments. There can be no more room for the Europe of austerity and selfishness. If we return to the past, once the COVID emergency is over, a past in which economic stability has always been more important than human solidarity, then Europe simply will not exist anymore. The final version of the text adopted at COP26 is a disappointing compromise. It is simply not adequate to the radical and the urgent action that the current climate crisis requires. The recent conference was strongly influenced by the crucial pressure of millions of young people assembled in the street all over the world. The disappointment at the last-minute backtracking by coal and the fossil fuels is therefore understandable. That we have to do more, we can do more. We are yielding to the interests of the lobbies of the multinational. We want to convince us, take our time, that there is no hurry. COP26 failed on the heights destined to tackle the climate crisis in the developing and the low-income countries. The text doesn't set a date for activating the fund of $100 billion a year in aid for decarbonization. It is no coincidence that the younger generation are demanding climate justice. Italy and Europe have the technologies, innovation, and the talents to seriously take the lead in the climate challenge. Driven by the von der Leyen-led Commission, Europe was immediately characterized by a strong green footprint and was the first continent to set the binding target of zero net emission. However, Europe risks being held back by the interests of individual member states. It is precisely the Europe of the Green Deal and the next generation Europe that risks having its green financing stopped. If the interest of the lobbies and those of France and Germany win out, we will have a green taxonomy that also includes gas and nuclear power, an oxymoron that will cost a lot in terms of speed, results, and credibility. Also, the agricultural reform has not earned its name. Many are desperately claiming this is a sustainable CAP reform, but the clear winner is the agricultural industry. On the contrary, I believe that the future of Europe must be on the path of sustainability. Europe, which was born out of an agreement on coal and steel, will rebuild itself on the pillars of fighting climate change and the green transition. If it succeeds, it will gain the leadership role in the most important challenge of the coming years. To win the climate challenge, we need the bold action, consistency, and speed. And we need a transversal alliance between politics, business, citizen, association, training institution, and intermediate bodies, because the transition is about innovation and the technology and an economic transformation that can lead to the new quality jobs. The European target of negative 55% by 2030 is also an extraordinary opportunity for the economy and employment that will enable 1,100 billion in investment and create 250,000 net new jobs. That is why we must be brave. We must have faith in innovation, but without reflecting past partners. It is clear that this transformation can only work if it involves and supports everyone, starting with the most vulnerable and disadvantaged. Indeed, environmental justice must go hand in hand with social justice. Alex Langer taught us many years ago, ecological conversion can only take place if it is socially desirable. Just as Europe will need to show that it is environmentally and socially sustainable in order to remain desirable.
Merci beaucoup, Rossella, pour cette intervention.
Thank you very much indeed, Rossella. Yes, you were able to do it in almost 7 minutes. We could also see how the youth was mobilized. On the 6th of November, we organized this march, and it was a rainy day, and it was very wet. And I have to say that the rain in Glasgow is wetter than the rain in Brussels. And you also alluded to some NGOs. There were more than 500 lobbyists of the fossil energies, and some were wondering whether they should be banned from attending the future COP summits. I now would like to give the floor to Urszula Zielińska. You are the Vice President of the Committee on Environment in the Parliament in Poland. I'm sure that you will specify your party, but I think that it's the party of the Greens. So thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me here today. I arrived from Warsaw, and I'm just so looking forward to this discussion and to exchange the views just right after COP26. I particular come from Poland. I am a member of the Green Party Poland. That's a part of the Green European Green family of parties, and a very proud member. But I'm from the country that is one of the slowest European in terms of climate action, and it actually really holding on to coal. So for me, I'm looking at COP as, on one hand, yes, it was disappointing. I'm very impatient, I'm very angry when I think about how is it possible that it was the first time there was a conversation and it was spelled out on paper that we need to walk away from coal. How is this possible so many years after Paris Agreement? So I'm angry about that. But on the other hand, on a daily basis, I work in a parliament where a vast majority of members of MPs are populist, nationalist, far right, or extreme right. And I know that my anger and my impatience doesn't get me any further in discussing with them and negotiating with them. So whilst I'm disappointed about the current COP outcomes, I'm at the same time looking for all the positives I can hold on to. And one of them was my prime minister, who on a daily basis is extremely critical of Europe. We are, as a country, facing an incredibly deep crisis of democracy right now. Courts are not independent anymore, and the government is extremely anti-EU in its narrative internally. And at the same time, my prime minister went to COP, and in his short speech opening at the opening session was actually expressing pride at the European Green Deal, and was really boasting about how great it is that Europe is the most ambitious in terms of its climate action and climate plan. And that was a complete news to me, because on a daily basis, Prime Minister of Poland is extremely negative towards European climate action, European climate law, and all the policies relating to it. So these were the kind of reasons. Then what followed, an agreement to, however it was spelled out, diminish coal, start walking away from coal finally. I mean, after all, it's there on paper. My country has also, for the first time this year, spelled it out on paper internally. For the first time ever, Poland said and put it in law that we will walk away from coal by 2049. Extremely late, not good enough, but it is something to hold on to, and for us as progressive forces to push forward. So whilst I'm saying I have to acknowledge this, that there is some good news to be really holding on to, like some like the coal, walking away from coal commitment, like some form of agreement to end deforestation, which, by the way, was signed by Russia, was signed by Bolsonaro, was signed by my government again, which is logging forests at incredible intensity as we speak, but they have signed some form of agreement to walk away. Yes, it's not legally binding, but it is some form of commitment. That's telling me that we need COP, we need to have more of those conversations, and we need to have ongoing meetings, and we need to push. And it's our role as progressive to push forward to make things progress faster from now on. And I have to hold on to it, because if I don't, I wouldn't be a politician, because I wouldn't be, I would say, well, the world is heading for disaster. What's the point of even trying? So that's my job. I think it's my role, and I think it's our role as activists as well, to keep pushing, but also acknowledge if something has been done, that it has been done. And what I believe, what we really need, and what I need from myself, as what I see our role as green politicians in Europe and globally right now, is I believe we need to change the narrative around the climate needs and climate action. I believe because we are facing such a huge wins from the populists of this world, who are constantly talking about giving things to people. My government has come to power thanks to direct transfers given at the right time, just before elections, as one-offs, based on incredibly populistic narrative. And whilst they are doing this with the wrong type of goal, to get to power and to just hold on to it for long and build authoritarian regimes, we need to respond with a narrative that tells in a simple way, in a simple language, what a great benefits climate policy and climate action and a different way of doing things bring to people. And the basis of this, or one point where I believe is important, it's the tension and fight between fossil fuels and people who hold on to fossil fuels and who make profit on fossil fuels versus renewables and versus a more democratic, more shared kind of economy that is based on a more democratic and more shared kind of energy system. Because fossil fuels are mostly or always very centralized, and they always or mostly give profit to only 5 energy companies in Poland that are government owned, for example. Renewables are spread worldwide and form a just safer and more democratic world. And I think building of this tension and explaining it in a very simple way, all the benefits, and giving hope to people based on not what they lose. Let's end coal, let's divest fossil fuels, let's shut down all those jobs in mines. We need to change it to creating jobs and opening new energy systems and creating clean air, safer, clean water. I believe that's what I miss, and that's what I believe I need to focus on with my colleagues in Poland, and what I'm trying to work on.
Merci beaucoup, Urszula.
Thank you so much, Urszula. Thank you very much. We know that Poland is committed. Of course, we also know that the issue of coal mines in your country is a key concern, and this is a key challenge. I think that it would be interesting to have in the debate an exchange on this. What do you expect from progressive parties in Europe? How could we help you? What type of just transition do we want? So I think that we could address those questions. But now I would like to give the floor to Andreu Escrivà. You are a writer, you are a scientist, so you are both. So I think that sometimes it's a little bit difficult, maybe. There is maybe sometimes a contradiction between your two positions as a writer on the one hand and as a scientist on the other. The floor is yours.
Bonjour. En primer lugar, gracias a la organización, a las compañeras y compañeros.
Good morning. Thank you very much to the organizers. I have taken many notes, and I will try to be as concise as possible. To answer the question about how I feel about the results of the COP, these are maybe good results, but for 1995, those results would have been great for 1995. But it's also true that we should acknowledge the work conducted by all those who tried to reach an agreement. We were able to achieve some victories, some small victories. But of course, there are still inequalities between countries, and there are still internal inequalities. So, unfortunately, we were not able to achieve this fund of $100 billion. So in this COP, we heard the contributions of many countries, and we could also see that the results are not consistent with scientific results. This COP took place after a summer during which in my country, we really witnessed a climate chaos in Spain. So the COP26 took place after a summer during which we could really see that climate change is not irreversible. Of course, we are about to exceed the 1.5 degrees increase. Now we speak of degrees, but I know that we have already reached 1.5 degrees in the Iberic Peninsula. So we know that the Mediterranean countries will be hardly impacted by climate change. So, of course, we have this scenario for 2030. And I fear that we might not be able to reach the greenhouse gases emissions reductions objectives. Now, we speak of 2.7 degrees by the end of this century. This is huge, and this is also totally unfair for those countries that will be severely impacted, knowing that they are not the responsible ones. So I think that we were able to see the mobilization of the youth, but of course we were also hit by the pandemic. I could feel that there was a certain level of mobilization. I was able to write a book on this topic in 2017. And I remember that in 2017, people did not speak a lot about climate change. But in 2018 and in 2019, people really knew about that. And they were furious. They wanted to mobilize. And then, of course, we had the lockdowns. And in Spain, but I'm sure that it's the same elsewhere, there was this trend according to which people started to say we have to rethink our relation with nature. But in a way, we lost a little bit this concept. And now we see that we still have the same peak levels as before the COVID pandemic. So we have to be vigilant. Time is of the essence, and the clock is ticking. Time is running out. Of course, we could contemplate emergency situations, but of course those solutions would not be sustainable. So in Europe, we speak of green energies. We speak of the nuclear energy. I do not want to speak about how dangerous it could be. Nuclear energy is expensive. It is slow. It is centralized. So we cannot speak of a democratization of the nuclear energy. And on top of this, this would be totally meaningless because this is also a fossil fuel. And we know that it is in the hand of large companies. And in Spain, for instance, those are the companies that are benefiting from the recovery fund. So this is totally crazy. This is inconsistent. So that's the reason why we have this delay strategy. I'm not sure that I'm using the right term here, but there is a delay. So many companies are going to make so many profits. Those countries that do not want to enter into technical solutions, they move away from those solutions. So, of course, we do not want to, or sometimes cities do not want to see the installation of tolls, for instance, at the entrance of the city. We need those solutions, but we need other solutions. It's not about a lifestyle, it is about a living condition. So we need to stress this, and in Europe we need to avoid this neo-colonial approach. If we want to have this green transition, we do not want to inflict a pain on other territories. The contributions made by citizens, of course, are important, but We need much more than that. We need agreements. We need negotiations at the national and EU level. Hervé, you mentioned quite a number of fights, and I think that we have to redefine the well-being, the living together. I think that this is a very important term. Biodiversity was mentioned earlier on. The green transition goes beyond the fact of simply saying whether the energy is expensive or not. We need to redefine. We need to rebuild better. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andreu, for sticking to the time. Thank you very much for being concise and straight to the point. Thank you very much for sharing your views. So I think that we have to refer to the statements made by scientists in the last IPCC report. So I do not know how much time we have left because we started quite late, and I do not know when we have to finish. Could you please let us know how long we still have? I would like to have this indication, please. Okay, so let's open the debate now with you, with the room. Let's not waste time. So I see that there are two requests for the floor. Anybody there? I feel like I'm alone here. Could you please give me a hand? Yes, the gentleman here. Thank you. Yes, I saw you. Go ahead.
Thanks to all the speakers. I have 3 points. One is about the issue that have been mentioned, so the issue of representation and the economic model and the transition raw material. The other is about the tools that have been proposed till now. And the third, what action could we do? So going to the first, about the representation, I think that the COP was symptomatic because I read that this COP, and this is a trend, has more and more representation for the business and less for the NGO and for the other countries which are less powerful. And this is a trend. I mean, it's a trend that is growing. About this economic model that was said, I think that is something that is outside of the Green Deal. The Green Deal, honestly, doesn't speak about changing the economic model. And this is a problem. And there are agencies within the European Commission, like the European Environment Agency, which said, look, the Green Deal, like this, it cannot work, because if we don't change the economic model, we don't solve this issue. But have you seen any institution, Commission, Parliament, trying to disseminate this? Not. And that was the case for the Dieselgate with the GRC report. Because when there is something that is uncomfortable, even the institutions have difficulties to treat. And then the issue of transition raw material. This is something very, very important, because if we don't consider the limitedness of these raw materials, and the fact that as Europe, we don't have these raw materials, and the fact that most of these are in some countries like China or, yes, South America, that creates a problem that was mentioned also in terms of political influence by other states. Okay, yes.
Je vais vous demander de pas.
May I ask you, please, not to revisit the whole debate, because there are many requests for the floor, and I would like to give the opportunity to everyone.
More as possible in communication. That means a communication which is not based only on political ideas, but try to reach also that kind of citizens that need to be reached. Because if we reach young people that are already manifesting on the street, that is already another ship. on our ship. We need to bring other people. So the young people that, for example, the dream not to have an electric car, but a powerful car. And we have here in Brussels, in Belgium, we have this, this kind of population. And then also political partnership. I think we cannot do this fight alone, and we have to look to political partnership. Thanks.
Merci. Alors, il y a beaucoup de mains qui se sont levées, pardon.
Thank you very much. Could you please try and stick to one theme, to one topic, please? Because we have till 1:40, and I see at least a dozen of requests for intervention.
L'absence de considération du système économique.
I would like to underline that the COP has not taken into account the dominant economic system. So why are you refraining from using only one adjective to define this economic system which predation destroys our planet? Understood. I suggest that the speakers should be given the opportunity to respond. Then another hand, Pierre, move back. Yes, there was a hand raised. She was one of the first.
Razem Party. I have a question to the Polish colleague from the Green Party. So you said that we should hold on to the fact that Premier Morawiecki and Bolsonaro signed some pledge to phase out coal, but well, to me, and I sincerely hope not also to you, I'm pretty sure that it's not enough. So what are your parties and your proposals for our country and politicians in our country, such as Green Socialists from Razem Party or ideological political allies? What can we do to achieve more here as a political force? I know it's hard. It's not that we have overwhelming support, but there are probably ways that we could maybe exert more influence. And in the same vein, you are part of a center liberal coalition, which is the largest opposition party in the country, and this center liberal opposition party in their program, which your party has signed, I have looked through it right now, and there are a couple of interesting proposals on green policy, but the words climate change do not even appear in that program document once. So is this also some communication strategy? Is it, as I suppose, because it's so difficult to explain to the Polish voters, where our economy is largely based on coal, or traditionally based on coal, that climate change, climate catastrophe is an important
Je vais vous demander d'aller
issue.
vers la conclusion.
Yes. So these are my two questions: how to communicate with the Polish voters, and how to push back. And in your opinion, how can you, in the opposition and in cooperation with us, do something more here? Thank you.
Voilà, alors là, on a un début de recherche de convergence au plan national.
This is a budding search for convergence at the national level. So, but let's try to broaden our perspective and try to view Europe and the world and look at transforming policies, alternative and transforming policies. How can we build them?
Thank you for a brilliant discussion. Seema Saida, UK Labour, Momentum and Another Europe is Possible. How can we move beyond electoral and parliamentary processes towards climate transformation? I think if we were having these discussions in the 1980s, we could build a slow movement towards transformation and net zero carbon. But now we have a deadline of 2030 to get to zero carbon to prevent the worst climate catastrophe. It's an existential crisis, and the electoral systems are too slow and they're not working. So how do we build strikes? How do we build disruption? How do we build extra parliamentary protests? How do we stop capitalism before it destroys us. I would like to discuss some more radical and urgent methods of change. Thank you.
Merci. Très bien, très bien. Très bonne question. Il faut bâtir des suggestions. Je rappelle que
Very well, very good intervention. We need to build proposals. Emmanuel Macron will be the president of Europe as from the 1st of January, which is quite ominous for the peoples of Europe. So let's take that into account.
Crisis climática. Y no es muy sorprendente, pues ya en el Acuerdo de Kioto hubo una exención explícita de las emisiones de CO2 militares, y si bien se eliminó la exención militar en el Acuerdo de París, todavía no es obligatorio que un Estado notifique sus emisiones de CO2 militar. De hecho, la categoría no existe en el IPCC, la distinción entre civil y militar. Sin embargo, sabemos que el Departamento de Defensa de Estados Unidos es el primer consumidor institucional de petróleo en el mundo.
We know that in the United States, they depend enormously on petrol, and nothing is being done on an institutional level in order to reduce CO2 emissions from military sources. And there is no distinction in IPCC between military exhausts and civilian exhausts. Thank you.
il y a une main qui s'est levée encore.
Okay, we take this into account. We have the red striped T-shirt person. Someone on my left, and then the last speaker. I cannot not give him the floor. He's been asking for it for quite some time.
International Commission also. I wanted to say, I still think COPE is greenwashing. It's more of indulgences. If we look at the high carbon footprint just of the whole conference, we have to really reflect if we should still do it. If you think of, there's a book saying that probably every 150 tons, one human dies of the consequence of climate change. So just think of the footprint of all those people coming. So I think it's more of Brave New World SOMA for the general public. And it might be even more negative, more dangerous to have those scopes, because the general public might think people already do stuff. Politicians already do stuff. So I think this might be a political show we have to be more critical of. Yes, I'm unfortunately, that's very unfortunate for all those people that try to negotiate something positive and that actually went to Glasgow. I went to Glasgow by train, but I know most people went by plane. And then you have to think of your impact. Is your impact by flying, is it worth it? And so there has been waves of people talking about the environment. So in the 80s, there was already movement. So we have to really rethink what are we going to do? Nobody has talked about animal agriculture, although animal agriculture is #1 emissions. And also here yesterday, we had lots of cheese, we had lots of meat and so on. So we also have to, as a left, we have to rethink our own consumption and not just make the big talk. Same with job creation. I think it's a little bit labor fetishism. It blinds us to what is actually needed. And this guy earlier was talking about well-being. It blinds us that we have to talk about needs and not about wants. And there's also the Paris lie. 1.5 is a lie. We need to drop it. I think we need to drop it. Last sentence. That's our strength, okay? Looking at what needs instead of wants, that's our strength. And our strength is also capitalism needs growth, but socialism does not.
Merci beaucoup. La dernière question et ensuite, ça sera...
Thank you very much. The last question, and then we'll give the floor back to our speakers.
Hello. This has been absolutely one of the most inspiring debates, so thank you for that. I'm J.P. Väisänen, chairperson of the Communist Party of Finland, and I use this mic to ask about the panelists. How do you see the collaboration among the environmental NGOs and the peace NGOs? And I ask this because my party will organize next year an event, and please Please give me all the information and all the interest of joining to prepare this event. Thank you.
Bien, merci. Nous ne pouvons plus prendre de questions.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we cannot let you ask any more questions right now. I'm just going to ask the speakers to try and respond to a few of the questions that have arisen in this discussion. As to the convergences to build, for next forum, we have to ask for a slot of 2 hours and a half to have a proper debate, because this has been way too short. So can we do it in the reverse order as far as the interventions of the members of the panel are concerned? Andreu, you have 1 minute, 1 minute and a half. Not more than that, because we're already lagging behind schedule. Go ahead. I'm going to try to answer one question.
So to a person who asked the question about military emissions, well, it's a few weeks that I've, since a conference I attended at the university a few days ago, I heard about this worry, the fact that military forces have enormous pollution. And it's something that we don't talk about very often in climate summits. So we have an agreement on everything that we do in the economy, and we know that marine transport, air transport are very polluting sectors, but at the same time, military operations pollute a lot, and governments don't talk about this because military operations are important for national safety. But we need to be transparent. We need to publish what they emit, and I believe that in Europe we can do that definitely. And we need to say how much are we contaminating, what are we willing to cut. And I am in favor of demilitarizing our states, and I believe that this can go hand in hand.
Very interesting, and we should go there. We should bond the two movements. And I was very, very happy to be in Madrid a few weeks ago in a Movimiento por la Paz, Movement for Peace, debate. And it was about agriculture. We just heard a question about that, about peace, about military, about everything. So I think we have to get together all the fights, because that's the way to go.
Merci, Andreu. Tu peux respirer maintenant.
Thank you, Andreu. You can breathe now. Urszula, you have the floor. If you agree, well, you're going to answer about Poland, of course, but can we broaden a bit your answer?
I promise. So thank you for those questions. So my Green Party, which in Poland is still very small, hopefully not for long, is indeed in coalition with a central conservative biggest opposition party. We're still in opposition, but it's the biggest opposition party, and it doesn't share our views on everything. It's obviously it doesn't, because otherwise we would be the same party under the same banner. And I think this is what progressives and green movements all over Europe and the world are facing. You have to decide whether to deliver one thing from your program or three, or deliver nothing, be in an opposition, but keep your pristinely clean values. And I prefer to, I believe the role of politicians is to negotiate, is to persuade, convince, and negotiate out way forward. And so that's answering your question. I believe this is what we have to do. What is working, I think, well and better is the opposition in Poland is cooperating on a daily basis with the left, with the basically vast majority of the opposition parties. work seamlessly, especially in the Environment Committee, especially in the Climate Committee. And we do manage to persuade, just sheerly by speaking about those topics that we care for, longer and more with people who didn't necessarily share our views yesterday, but having had the conversation, having spent 3 days in Parliament discussing topics, it really helped us a lot in the past, shifting from one point of view to a greener point of view, and then coming to a decision, a joint vote that was in favor of the green topics. And so as long as I can see this, I think this is working, and I need to keep pressing. And that's precisely why I came to politics from the street. Never been interested in politics before. I realized things are not going in that, and my voice is not heard in Parliament. So I decided to change it, and I encourage more of you to try it. I hope I answered. Sorry, there is no more time. That point on climate you mentioned, you asked for, it is in the program, page 91. The whole section is called Climate and Water and Ecology. So I'll send you the link after all. Thank you.
D'accord, merci beaucoup, Urszula. Je pense que...
Thank you very much. I think you'll have the opportunity to talk and discuss of the way forward together. Now, 1 minute 30 for Rossella.
La circolare, quella del futuro fatta di sostenibilità, è proprio un cambiamento dei ruoli.
Okay, I will speak Italian and Adele will help me. I think the most important thing in the circular economy of the future is to change the roles.
I cittadini smettono di essere semplici utenti consumatori inconsapevoli e diventano protagonisti.
The citizens stop being just consumers, unconscious consumers, but become the main leading characters.
Fornitori di materia prima per quanto riguarda la gestione dei rifiuti.
They are the providers of the raw material in terms of waste management.
O produttori di energia pulita con le comunità energetiche.
Or producer of clean energy with the energetic communities.
Secondo me dobbiamo tenere insieme un nuovo modello sociale.
We need to obtain together a new social model.
La produzione pulita di energia e anche di beni.
The clean production of goods and energy.
E la democrazia.
And democracy.
Queste tre cose sono legate assolutamente nella costruzione di un mondo più giusto.
And these three aspects are intimately linked in building a just future world.
Merci, même pas 1 minute 30, ça va très bien.
Thank you, Rossella. Your intervention has been under 1 minute 30. So, Diego, if you agree, now you can take the floor for 1 minute 30.
Voy a intentar responder alguna pregunta.